Most people are taught to believe they started in the same place, that the difference comes later, that outcomes separate because of effort, discipline, or decisions made along the way. It sounds fair, it feels reasonable, and it is repeated often enough that it becomes the default assumption. But the separation does not begin later. It begins before most people can even recognize it. Some people are not starting the race. They are starting inside the system the race is built around. Access is not loud. It does not announce itself. It does not look like an advantage when you are inside it. It looks normal. It feels standard. It becomes the baseline someone measures everything else against. A child growing up around business conversations does not recognize that as access. It feels like background noise. Hearing how money moves, how deals are structured, how risk is evaluated. It does not register as education. It becomes instinct without being labeled as such. Another child, just as capable, grows up without that proximity. No exposure to how capital is deployed. No visibility into how decisions are made at higher levels. The system is not explained. It is not observed. It remains abstract. Both grow older. Both are told to work hard. Both are told opportunity exists. But one of them is stepping into something familiar. The other is trying to decode something invisible. The difference is not effort. It is entry point. Access quietly removes friction. It shortens the distance between a person and a decision. It reduces the time it takes to understand what matters and what does not. It eliminates entire categories of confusion before they ever form. When someone has early access, they do not spend years asking basic questions. They are already positioned around better ones. What to build, where to allocate, who to connect with. They are not trying to understand the system, they are interacting with it. For someone without access, the early phase looks different. Time is spent learning rules that were never clearly defined. Mistakes are made not from poor judgment, but from incomplete visibility. Energy is used trying to identify where opportunity even exists. This is where most people believe they are falling behind. But they are not falling behind. They are starting outside. Access also determines what feels possible. If you grow up seeing certain outcomes repeatedly, they stop feeling exceptional. They become expected. A certain level of income, ownership, or control no longer feels distant. It feels like a direction. Without that exposure, the same outcomes can feel unrealistic, not because they are impossible, but because they are unfamiliar. The mind treats unfamiliar paths as higher risk, even when the actual risk is neutral. So decisions begin to diverge. One person moves toward expansion because it feels normal. Another hesitates because it feels uncertain. Same world, different starting perception. Over time, this difference compounds quietly. The person with access begins making slightly better decisions earlier. Not perfect decisions, just more informed ones. That slight edge, repeated consistently, starts to separate trajectories. They enter rooms sooner. They recognize patterns faster. They avoid certain mistakes entirely. From the outside, it looks like acceleration. From the inside, it feels like continuation. And this is where the illusion becomes difficult to see, because by the time results appear, the starting point is already forgotten. The system does not reward effort equally. It rewards aligned effort. And alignment is easier when you begin close to the structure itself. That is the invisible advantage, not talent, not luck in the traditional sense, but proximity. Some people are learning how the system works. Others never had to learn. They were placed inside it. Access does not only determine where someone begins, it determines how quickly they move once they start. Most people assume progress is tied to effort over time. Work more, learn more, eventually advance. The model sounds linear. It suggests that with enough consistency, outcomes begin to equalize. But the system is not linear. It is selective. Access functions as a filter long before effort is measured. It decides what information reaches you, what opportunities become visible, and what pathways even exist in your field of view. It is not about working harder within the same structure. It is about being exposed to a different structure entirely. Two people can apply equal effort in two completely different information environments. One is operating with fragmented inputs. The other is operating with structured insight. They are not solving the same problem. Most people underestimate how much time is lost simply trying to identify what matters. Without access, the early phase is inefficient by default. Attention is scattered. Effort is applied across multiple directions with no clear signal of which one compounds. Trial and error becomes the primary method. And while trial and error can eventually produce results, it is slow, it is expensive, and it creates fatigue long before clarity appears. Access compresses this phase. It removes unnecessary exploration. It narrows the field. It directs attention toward what is already known to work within a given system. Not perfectly, but efficiently. This is why some people appear to figure things out faster. They are not guessing less because they are smarter. They are guessing less because the range of possible mistakes has already been reduced. The system around them has pre-filtered outcomes. What they see as obvious was never visible to others. Access also determines the quality-structured environment. Feedback loops are tighter. Results are observed sooner. Adjustments happen earlier. Small corrections prevent large errors from forming. Outside of that structure, feedback is delayed. Mistakes can go unnoticed for long periods. Patterns are harder to detect. Progress feels inconsistent because the signal is unclear. This creates a second layer of separation, not just in speed, but in direction. With access, movement is guided. Without it, movement is exploratory. Both require effort, but one compounds faster because it is aligned earlier. Over time, this difference becomes structural. The person with access is no longer just ahead. They are operating in a different tier of decisions. They are no longer asking how to start. They are deciding how to expand. They are no longer focused on entry. They are focused on leverage. Meanwhile, the person without access is still working through the earlier phase, trying to reach clarity. The gap is no longer visible as access. It looks like ability. And this is where the system reinforces the illusion, because once outcomes begin to separate, the explanation shifts. Success is attributed to discipline. Failure is attributed to lack of effort. The starting conditions disappear from the narrative, but they never disappeared from reality. Access is not just a beginning advantage. It is a multiplier. It shapes what you see. It shapes how you move. It shapes how quickly your decisions improve. And most importantly, it determines whether your effort compounds or circulates. Because effort without access does not always move forward. Sometimes, it just moves in place. Before this continues, if you felt seen instead of sold to, that's the entire point of Relentless Wealth. Like the video, subscribe. We're just getting started. Environment does not announce itself as influence. It does not present itself as a force shaping decisions. It feels passive, background, neutral. But it is neither passive nor neutral. It is instructional. Every environment carries a set of expectations, not written, not explained, but repeated through behavior. What people around you prioritize, what they ignore, what they consider normal, what they avoid. These patterns become reference points, not consciously, but consistently. And over time, they form boundaries. In one environment, ownership is common. People talk about equity, assets, long-term positioning. Decisions are framed around control and leverage. Risk is evaluated with context, not fear. In another environment, stability is the priority. Income is central. Predictability is valued. Risk is treated as something to avoid. Decisions are framed around security, not expansion. Neither environment explains itself. Neither one declares its limitations. They simply repeat. This repetition becomes internal. It shapes what feels reasonable. It shapes what feels excessive. It shapes what feels possible. A certain level of income can feel normal in one setting and extreme in another. A certain type of decision can feel standard in one environment and reckless in another. Same action, different interpretation. This is where environment begins to influence behavior without resistance, because it does not feel like influence. It feels like common sense. If no one around you builds, building feels uncertain. If no one around you invests, investing feels risky. If no one around you owns, ownership feels distant, not because it is out of reach, but because it is out of view. Environment also determines exposure to outcomes. You do not just learn from instruction, you learn from observation. Seeing results repeatedly changes how you process decisions. It reduces hesitation. It normalizes progression. Without that exposure, outcomes remain abstract. The path exists, but it lacks reference. And without reference, the mind defaults to caution. This is why two individuals with similar ability can make entirely different choices under the same conditions. One moves forward, the other pauses, not because of confidence, but because of conditioning. Environment sets the baseline for what action feels acceptable. Over time, this becomes structural. The environment does not need to limit you directly. It only needs to shape your default decisions. Small differences in decision-making, repeated over time, begin to separate outcomes. Not dramatically, but consistently. And consistency is enough. The system does not require restriction. It relies on alignment. If your environment aligns you with certain behaviors, you will repeat them without pressure. If it does not, you will resist alternatives without realizing it. This is where the advantage becomes difficult to detect, because it is not enforced, it is absorbed. Some people grow up in environments that quietly prepare them for the system. Others grow up in environments that never intersect with it. Both move forward. Both apply effort. But one is moving with reinforcement. The other is moving against absence. And absence slows everything. Environment does not decide your outcome, but it defines your starting behavior. And starting behavior, repeated long enough, becomes trajectory. Not through force, through familiarity. By the time outcomes become visible, the starting conditions are no longer questioned. What began as access and environment now looks like ability. The difference has already compounded. Early exposure does not just accelerate progress, it removes entire phases. The phase of confusion, the phase of misdirection, the phase of searching for what matters. Those phases are not eliminated completely, but they are shortened, guided, and contained. For others, those same phases can last years, not because of a lack of effort, but because of a lack of visibility. This is how advantage becomes invisible, because it is no longer measured at the point where it began. It is measured at the point where it compounds, and at that point, it looks earned in isolation. But it was never isolated. The system reinforces this misunderstanding. It rewards outcomes. It does not explain pathways. It highlights results. It does not show starting positions. So the narrative becomes simple. Some people made better choices. Some people worked harder. Some people were more disciplined. And while those things matter, they are not the full structure. Because better decisions are easier to make when the system is visible. Discipline is easier to sustain when direction is clear. Effort compounds faster when it is aligned early. What looks like advantage later often began as proximity earlier. This is where most people misread their position. They compare outcomes without accounting for entry points. They measure distance without recognizing different starting lines. They evaluate themselves inside a system they were never shown how to enter. And over time, that creates distortion, not just in results, but in perception. Because when you do not see the structure, you assume the outcome reflects the individual. And when that assumption repeats long enough, it becomes belief. But once the structure becomes visible, the comparison changes. The question is no longer, why am I behind? It becomes, where am I positioned relative to the system? Because positioning determines what you see, and what you see determines how you move. This is the shift from effort alone to awareness of structure, from isolated action to strategic alignment. Not to remove effort, but to direct it. Because effort without visibility can take years to compound. Effort with visibility begins compounding immediately. Same energy, different trajectory. That is the role of early exposure, not to guarantee success, but to remove delay. And in a system built on compounding, delay is not neutral. It is the difference. If this shifted how you see the system, subscribe. Like this if it clarified something.